It is Florin-Cristian Loghin on Bravo versus Maciej Janik of Poland on Bravo as well. Mirror matches, my friend. Sometimes they get a little bit dull, but not this one. This one's going to be real spicy.
Yeah, so this is a full-on mirror match. Both are playing sort of 16-17-17 and 16-17-18 is best I've kind of deduced it here in terms of the elements. So they're both almost exactly the same there. So it's the differences between the lists is that one player has a couple of pummels and expose the elements, and the other player has some Art of Wars. So I'm not 100% sure whether he plays Art of Wars in the mirror match, but yeah, I think that they're both playing around about the same number of reactions. One player's playing an extra sync below, one player's playing Staunch, the other's playing Turn Timber. So it's going to come down to a few, kind of really interesting small numbers.
And opening up here with a full Starvo activation on the Evergreen. The question here, Matt, is a lot of people discuss the fact that sometimes you just don't want to attack early. You don't want to give your opponent an opportunity to filter. On Starvo, though, if you have that opportunity to go ahead and push that damage early, you have to take that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's quite interesting here is that Exposed has been pitched straight away on turn 1. So you don't have to play around it on the Crown anymore. That Exposed isn't coming up for a long time, at least 12 turns.
And we do have the deck list over here, so if you do see there's a one of or such, you see a pitch, you can be very confident that you're not going to have to worry about it until maybe way late in the game. But already right out of the box here, Florin starting with the pressure, but that got stuffed by a Turn Timber, but right back at him. Maciej with the Crippling Crush 11. Now there is no Starvo activation on this. This is not Dominate, but this is going to definitely be asking for an answer.
Yeah, so this this is the classic Crippling Crush time walk going on here, where you can just throw if you don't hit a Starvo activation, you can just throw 11 at them, and it basically demands the majority of their hand anyway. So the turn's going to come back to you with tempo. They can't exactly take this, and it makes it very hard for them to fuse. They pretty much can never fuse on the back end of a Crippling. So if they've set up, or even if they just have an Oakenold there ready for you, Crippling can just push that out, turn that off.
Okay, and one of the major, sort of points of variation of Starvo lists oftentimes comes with the equipment. Is it Stalagmite? Is it Ram's Head? And in this case, we see a Tunic, but Florin's not wearing a Tunic here.
No. We got Tectonic Edge over here, so we got a full fridge. I think what's really interesting about this is we've got 8 block there in the equipment, right? So 8 block plus 3 from hand, that's the full 11 for a fused Oakenold. So where one player needs a defense react to stop a fused Oakenold, our other player doesn't. Florin does not need a defense react. He can full out block an Oakenold without one.
That can definitely be significant when you can preserve your hand for the most part into those big plays. And in these Starvo mirrors, being able to connect with an Oakenold or a Crippling Crush in those regards, having, like you said, having an opportunity to basically play 2 turns in a row. And in this case, Art of War, which is another one of those cards that a lot of people just either don't immediately put in this deck, but in this case, Florin is going to go with the Art of War.
Yeah. So Art of War's quite an interesting dynamic in that it's a card that helps all of your 2 blocks to block more significantly, but it also helps your off turns to, basically go again and attack a couple times, right? So Art of War can do both sides of the coin.
So how much of these matchups here, Matt, in the mirror is just about making sure that you maintain those momentums? Is this just a matter of who can find and fuse their Oakenolds first and more frequently, or is there a little bit more nuance in this matchup?
Yeah, I think there's some serious nuance in this matchup. I think that there's a few things that matter here, right? So there's obviously whoever hits with more Oakenolds or Crippling Crushes, ones that actually hit, is generally going to win the match. But most mirrors don't come down to that. Most mirrors you hit with the same amount each. You're each maybe hit through with 1, right? So when you're hitting with the equal amount, it really comes down to kind of how your late game pitch stack is and how you can set up to make sure that you're effectively revealing more often than they are, and that you're shutting down the turn cycles of the of the reveal, even just the Evergreen, etc. Attack reveal, and shutting it down to still keep up the pressure of the Ice Hammer.
Here's Winter's Wail, again, an easy pitch of blue. There's plenty of them in that deck. Florin just presenting 4 points of damage with a Frostbite Chaser. Why not? There's something you can stare at while you're trying to, parse out your turn. Maciej with, his coming back and just taking the damage, taking the frostbite, because, hey, I've got Starvo. In this case, we've got a Claws, we've got an Evergreen, we've got Winter's Bite. That makes Starvo so much more nasty, and we're going to follow that up merely with the Evergreen. Again, in this case, typically the way this goes is you pitch the Lightning card, you go in with the green attack, and then you follow up with the hammer. In this case, however, the Frostbite's going to stop that potential hammer swing, because I'm suspecting that Maciej is more inclined to just pocket that card. That card is destined for the arsenal. It's not necessarily going to be thrown out with the hammer, right?
Yeah, I think it really just depends on how he blocks. When you make an attack like this, when they defense react your first attack, and they are like potentially not from arsenal and they still have crown up, you're very unincentivized to attack with the hammer, because they can just, with their floating resource, they can just crown and then block with a 3-block. But it really depends on kind of how, basically how he blocks. If he doesn't block it at all and take 9, you're in this awkward position that if you arsenal, you know that he's coming back likely with an Oakenfold or something pretty big. So you're kind of incentivized to throw out the hammer, because he might have to use 2 of his equipment blocks in order to be able to get that Oakenfold off. So that's the mirror match is a very interesting match, and we see here Florin has Eye of Ophidia, 2 Earth cards, and I believe an Ice card in hand. So he may be looking to, at some point in this turn, pitch the Eye of Ophidia to crown, try to find the missing Lightning card, and then be able to fuse himself. So it's all about how he kind of maneuvers this around to make sure that the ice token doesn't cost him a whole card. The fact of not playing Tunic means that ice token is going to cost you a whole card to come back in on.
And that's incredibly devastating, because oftentimes these Starvo turns, those Dream Starvo turns are, you fuse, you pitch, you attack, you pitch, you attack, and then you've got a card for the arsenal. It just works out so perfectly. It's a nice fit, fits like a glove. You go in here, but now Florin's staring down a 9-point dominated go again Evergreen. He's going to go ahead. Another staunch response is going to go ahead and stuff that. There is the Eye of Ophidia, which is a very unique choice in these cards. Talking to a lot of players, everybody has their own little, their own little spice. They've got their own little secret recipe that they want to come in with, and some people were saying, I got Eye. I got Eye. Now tell me the significance of why Eye in this matchup can have such an impact.
Yeah, so my team Dragon Shield, we all played Eye of Ophidia. We felt that card just performed way above rate. Pretty simply, it just helps you to hit your fuse turns. If you really need, and the matchups like the mirror where you really need to fuse as much as possible, it's you get to see 3 cards. Your percentages was seeing 3 cards to look for 1 lightning card. I think it's around, it's closer to the 70% mark. So you're very likely to fuse if you have 2 elements and you pitch Eye.
That's massive. That's absolutely massive. And it's fascinating, because everyone thought that Starvo was solved. Everybody complaining about, it's Starvo everywhere. It's the same deck. It's not the same deck, because here we at the Pro Tour and people are still, turning knobs and dialing things up and changing the frequency to find that perfect tune. And in this case, Eye of Ophidia kind of late to the party in terms of sliding into Starvo games. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think I guess in this position, decided that the hammer hit was going to be much more, basically more important than the arsenal. Already your opponent's not going to fuse, right? Because they only have 3 cards in hand, and the ice hammer means that they're getting an ice token. So if they fuse, they have to give up early game equipments, which you basically never want to do in the mirror, right? So the ice hammer just makes it free. It means that if your opponent has a fuse, they're not going to be fusing. So it's a lot more important to come in for 4, threatening that ice, than it is to arsenal in that spot, because it basically just forces your opponent to not have a fuse turn.
So Florin here presenting that Ice Hammer again, like you mentioned, very disruptive. It does create a situation where there's going to be no real big clapback, because you're either blocking this out fully, you're committing some equipment, which, like you mentioned, you don't want to do. And cards like Bastion of Eisenloft, the Stalagmite, those are clutch late game.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the whole. So sort of what I was saying before is, if one player hits with 1 more Oakenfold than the other player, that player will almost always win the game. So your equipments are really important going into later on in the game when those Oakenfolds are coming out. You need to make sure you're as safe as possible against them.
So that's a break round of red. That's coming in for 7. That's not a 16, trust me. There's no secret erratas we've made here ever since, but a nice little 7 is still an awkward number. Again, you still got to chip away. It's early game. Both players are above 30, and really the fireworks haven't necessarily occurred just yet. We've seen a fuse on one side. We've seen a crippling crush on the other, but the Oakenolds are still lurking in both decks. Those are going to be those significant plays, and like you mentioned, Matt, Florin here having equipment that can really just absorb the lion's share of that damage is going to be very, very important. But on the opposite hand, you do not have that free card where that perfect peanut butter jelly kind of combination of crown and tunic of getting that free extra card without having to pitch. I mean, that's a very big part of what Starvo can do, of having those 5-card hands without having to give anything up.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, we've got an Oakenold turn here. So this is, obviously Florin had to take a lot of damage to get this done, but this was a turn where Maciej did not have an arsenal, right? So that's the exact turn that you want to get Oakenold off. If they don't have an arsenal, they can't dig for a defense react, and then it's so hard, they have to give up equipments to stop your Oakenold. Either that or they need, even with a staunch response, pitching 2 cards, that's still only 10. It doesn't hit the magic number of 11. So if you don't have an arsenal, you have to give them an equipment or you're taking it.
Yeah, a little 00 fuse here. Oakenold fused twice, once with Starvo, once within the actual card. This is an 11 coming through. Anything that trickles through is going to be some hand disruption. In Maciej's hand, he does have, there's the Channel Lake Frigid presenting for the block, but there's also an Oakenold in Maciej's hand as well. We'll see what he manages to give up, but ultimately, I mean, this is just like you mentioned earlier. This is just Florin having a second go at this entire attack pattern here. So we're gonna let the gods decide, and that's the card that Maciej's gonna keep, and the rest go to the bottom of the deck. Just take a quick peek there, but the significance there of Channel Lake Frigid. There's going to be 3 in the deck. Obviously, there's a very powerful card, but Channel Lake Frigid late game can really keep the ball in your court.
Yeah. Channel Lake Frigid kind of forces them to play a little bit fairer, or like they have to pay more for their defense reacts. They have to, pay more for their attacks. And if you can keep it around for 2 turns, the value you get out of that is massive. So. All
right. So 1 Oakenold is down again. When you're kind of looking at particular heroes, there's going to be major threats that you need to keep track of. For Starvo, you need to keep track of how many Oakenolds have been played, how many of those are still lurking. Crippling Crush is another one.
Absolutely.
Much like 3 of a Kind with Lexi, or much like Art of War with Chain, every hero kind of has these triple threats that you need to be aware of. And Maciej now saying, all right, 1 down, it hurt, but we're kind of even Steven here. I'm down by 2, but I've seen one of their major threats, and I haven't really presented one of my own. And Maciej kind of looking to the sky here. All right,
he's praying.
He's looking for some outside help. It ain't going to come to you there, Maciej. You got to do this yourself.
Yeah, so Maciej is really just hoping for an off turn here. The strategy there on an Oakenold is block it, let it take 2 of your cards, arsenal the other one, and then hope that it doesn't matter that they have a 5-card hand effectively, right? If they have an off turn, which can happen a lot more in the early game when their deck's full of more defense reacts, if they have an off turn, the extra cards aren't doing anything,
I think Maciej is just, like you mentioned in the interview, his eyes lit up and he just changed his whole demeanor when I mentioned pummel. It was like a dog whistle. He's like, huh? Yeah, pummel, let's do this.
Let's go.
He's got to find a window for this. I mean, the ultimate turn here for him would be if he can find, like he did it yesterday. He combined an Oakenold with a pummel, bought the entire hand, and pushed an immense amount of damage.
Yeah, pummel adds such an interesting dynamic to the games, because like the thing is with pummel, it also makes your blinks really good. So like blink traditionally not very good in the mirror because it doesn't block, but if you pitch with a tunic counter up, if you pitch and play an icy encounter with a blink, they have to assume, a lot of the time they're going to assume you're going to pummel them. They got to try to play around that because you've got 1 resource floating, you've got tunic counter, you got a card plus in hand, and then you can just if they play around and overblock to pummel, you could just cast blink, come in with the hammer, and punish them.
Yeah, there's a difference between top 8 and sort of your day 1, where you don't know what your opponent is bringing to the party. There must be a different approach here. Florin, how does it change the game, Matt, when you know that you need to work around a pummel, much like when you're playing against Alexi and you're like, I got to work around a Rain Razors, for example. How does that change your approach to these matches, knowing that there's pummels swimming around in that pond.
Yeah, so Pummel changes things massively. It puts a lot of pressure on your defense reacts. So it means that you can't just use your defense reacts to gain yourself points in the early game, to gain yourself effective life in the early game and get a little bit of it ahead. You do need to rely on those to make sure you don't get blown out in the late game. And it also means that you don't want the mirror to go this kind of very nickel and dime back and forth. You guys, each go from 25 to 20 to 18, down at the same number, because then Pummel is just going to blow you out at the end.
Yeah.
So you really need to put the game state, you really need to punish them for having those pummels in the deck. Having these block 2 red cards that don't fuse, you need to make sure you're punishing them for that earlier on, so that you've got enough of a life lead later on that if they do get one off in the late game, it's not going to be lights out for you, and you are going to be able to recover from it.
Yeah, because a lot of these games, like you mentioned, are kind of, it's back and forth. They seem to kind of both life totals kind of trickle down, trickle down, trickle down, trickle down. I mean, you mentioned that you had a 17-1 mirror match, right, against one of these players, and it eventually came down to 1-1. But Pummel's like having the mushroom in Mario Kart. You just kind of, accelerate a little bit beyond your opponent there and being able. But here's an 11-point attack, Okinold, the dream.
There we go. Yep, Okinold straight back at you. And I think that's quite an interesting point. The whole reason that game was like a 17-1 game is because I knew that he had Pummel in his deck when I went into that match, right? I'd seen, or a teammate told me or something, that he was on Pummel. So I knew. In the mirror, I quite like to nickel and dime. I quite like to kind of take it slow, kind of value my defense reacts and make sure that I'm outvaluing them one life at a time. But if I'm playing against a Pummel deck, I have to play the matchup very differently, and I have to take a lot of risks and kind of, try to pressure, and that means I have to take a lot more damage.
So this is exactly that situation we're talking about,
exactly,
right? Because you're mentioning that this is 11, you're equipped to block this. You've got what you need to actually block this, but now Pummel is like the boogeyman. It's like this dark cloud kind of hovering over you, and you have to respect it. So is this a situation of overblocking, in which case Maciej must be happy with that as well?
Yeah, well, Maciej's revealed the 2 cards in his hand, so we know that there isn't Pummel this turn. So yeah, it's all about trying to utilize his equipments now so that he's still got his defense reacts later on, or utilize his defense reacts now so that he has his equipment later on, and that's the balance that he's got to try to find here. And definitely the fact when you're playing against Pummel adds to that dynamic a lot.
Staunch response coming in big on this one. That is going to be pumped up, I believe, as well, to make sure that this catches everything. I think Florin here just wants to perhaps just come back with, I believe there's an ice card in the hand, if I'm not mistaken. So there's the follow-up. He's going to pitch the whole thing away, continue the pressure, and this is a situation perhaps where, I'm going to get a Frostbite, but I'm not going to get an Arsenal. But if this hammer goes through, you're also not going to get an Arsenal if you want to come back with your hammer.
Yeah. So, definitely putting the pressure on Florin to not be able to attack, but I very much like the Stalagmite block here. This is kind of the perfect Stalagmite block, because when they've revealed 2 cards off Oaken and their Tunic's not on 3, you know that if they want to attack you or if they want to Arsenal, either way they lose an entire card. So Stalagmite is blocking for 2, but it also takes an entire card. So yeah, he either has to pitch 2 cards to attack or just Arsenal with 1 card and do nothing with the other. So it's a straight card advantage Stalagmite block.
That's the beauty of a card like Stalagmite, and a lot of times I like to discuss just the sheer value of what Stalagmite represents. It's not just what's on the surface you're blocking to. It's what it represents and what it's stopping, because that Stalagmite might also then hinder a follow-up hammer. So the Stalagmite in that case is blocking 2 plus the 4 plus the potential Frostbite. It has a lot more underneath the surface in terms of what it represents.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a very interesting block here. I actually love this block. So utilizing the equipments early so that he can keep the pressure on. So usually in a Starvo match, you wouldn't block with the equipments like that on the hammer if you're trying to nickel and dime them. But when you're playing against Pummel, I think you have to play completely differently. So if you block with the hammer right now, when they don't have an Arsenal, you're pressuring them straight away and getting an Arsenal. You're kind of speeding the game up and putting more pressure on their life total, so that they can't set up a good Pummel turn.
Excellent point here, and the utilization of the Crater Fist and the Tectonic Plate to block out the hammer means that you can just go ahead, pitch an ice card, come back with the hammer, and maintain an Arsenal. Turns like this seem so unsuspecting this, he seems so, mid. They're just not very flashy. It's just pitch a card, come in with my weapon. Most other decks would be unsatisfied with a move like this, but this is perfectly fine with the Starvo strategy.
I mean, he just blocked out an Oakenald, right? Like, his opponent just Oakenalded him. Like, I don't know how much you can expect.
Give me some credit. I just blocked out an Oakenald. So the follow-up here is just going to be a blue break ground for 5. No big deal, I guess. I mean, but again, it's in that nickel and dime strategy, that slow clawing of just kind of chipping away. Maciej and Florin both well above 20. They're both above 20. So there's a lot of runway in this game, and I think each player. I believe Florin has played 1 Oakenald, and I think Maciej has played 1 as well.
Yep.
I don't think there's a second that's been played, so there's still a lot of fireworks that are swimming around in both players' decks.
Yeah, it's interesting here that both players feel the need to keep the pressure maximum, to really pressure their opponent. And I honestly think the whole dynamic of that is just because of Pummel. So you can see why he got so excited in the interview about Pummel. He gets to play an entire game plan around Pummel. Like, look at this. He's attacking for 5, which doesn't seem very threatening, but he's got 2 resources up and a card in hand. He is threatening a Pummel, and whether he has it or not, just the whole dynamic of how this changes Florin's turn is where he's getting all of his advantage from.
It's like, I know you know the end of this movie, but it's still gonna it's still gonna be good, right? Like, there's spoiler season, but hey, 2 resources floating. There it is.
And there's the Pummel. Here we go. And that's gonna hurt. If he doesn't have the defense react, that is gonna really hurt.
Maciej going clubbing, baby. He's got his clubbing shoes on. There it goes. Pummel red. That is gonna really supercharge this attack. That is now 9 damage coming through with the extra on hit of having to discard a card and peeling cards away from your opponent. They're allowed to choose what they want to discard in this case, and they may be able to toss out some garbage. But what this may signify, or what the significance of this is that the follow-up might either rob them of a secondary attack, or it might rob them of an arsenal. So there's the significance of Pummel here is huge. But is Florin here just maybe considering is the thought process here, the pause, the consideration, because there's potentially a D-react that he's considering?
Yeah, so Florin absolutely might have a D-react in arsenal or in hand that he's considering following this up with. But otherwise, it could be quite an interesting situation where, a fuse only costs 3 cards, right? So maybe you just trade a bunch of life and say, I don't care about Pummel. It's going to discard 1 card, but I've still got the 3 I need to fuse and attack you back. And you don't have an arsenal, so that's going to really pressure your life total that's currently at 17.
There's the pitch, or a discard rather, of
got an
Oakenald.
Oakenald off that Pummel.
How good is your hand when you're just throwing away Oakenolds like
was it a fuse Oakenald, and like he still wanted a fuse, so he had to give up the Oakenald? Because that's huge.
That could be.
It is.
It is. Wow.
Absolutely.
See, there's the pure value of Pummel. Maciej is so happy that this is why he felt so comfortable with this, because look at what Pummel represented here. It stopped a double fuse, double O Oakenald coming in right at your face, but now it's evergreen. It was a blue evergreen, 7 dominate, go again.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people put in a lot of extra defense reactions to try to stop Oakenald. Have you ever heard of the saying, the best defense is a good offense?
Yes, I have.
That was a very good way to stop an Oakenald.
Trust me, when the Montreal Canadiens had a terrible defensive core, it's like, well, if we just score more goals. I know that hockey is a game played on ice. Do you have ice? Do you have ice in New Zealand?
I mean, down south we do. I mean, in my freezer, for a drink. Yeah.
So yeah, again, like you mentioned, a good defense. The best defense is a good offense. If you continue the pressure, keep peeling cards out of Maciej's hand, that is just another way to sustain your own life. But again, the life totals here, both players throwing haymakers back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing the perfect stalagmite block again here, right? Like the stalagmite that forces you to give me a whole card for it. That's why stalagmite could just be so amazing in the mirror, is that it blocks 2, 1, and 2 cards.
Yeah.
If it's used in the right spots and if it lines up, it's demanding 2 whole cards and 3 life.
So we're going to go ahead, pitch, create a seismic surge, which, I mean, I don't think I've said that in I don't know how many months, creating the seismic surge, other than, since Awakening, obviously. But, man, tectonic plating, it's nice to see you again. Where you been? More pitching here to complete the package. Go ahead, get rid of the Frostbite that was created from the Stalagmite, Bastion of Weisenloff. We're going to go ahead and just pitch the ice card, come in with the Winter's Wail. Again, a nice little 4. Something, when you're talking about the best weapons in the game, Matt, obviously Rosetta Thorn comes to mind. Where would Winter's Wail rank?
I think it's pretty close. I think it's pretty close between Rosetta Thorn and Winter's Wail. I do think Rosetta Thorn probably takes it, but Winter's Wail is incredible value. I mean, the ice token usually represents a whole point, and sometimes it represents a whole card. So, if you're trading one card for potentially attacking you for 4 and the value of another card, it's just huge.
So the Frostbite is there. Maciej finally single digits. He is at 8. Again, Maciej going into this matchup, perfect 7-0 in the mirror match. You got to play catch up, and this is a great way to start. Going with the Starvo Fuse, showing all of the different elements possible here, and we're going to go in with I believe that is a yellow break round. It's going to be 8 damage, dominate, go again. This is a good start. Now, no on-hit effect with this, so is this a situation perhaps where Florin, if he finds another big hand, you just eat this?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, eating the whole turn is a lot of damage. We're talking 8 and then 4, and then he still has an arsenal. But he's just used his tunic counter to get rid of that Frostbite. So the Stalagmite could give a second one and really put him into a bad spot if he wants to attack again, right? Gain a whole card, no arsenal, and that's where Florin might be able to really put on the pressure. Like, he could take 13 damage this turn or something like that, but then put enough pressure that that he can't come back and do kind of a pummel blowout play, because he's going to have to start blocking. He's going to be put into a blocking cycle.
Florin Loghin of Austria here, the 4th seed of the Pro Tour, is just thinking this through. Again, so much at stake here, no room for error. You want to make sure that every single play you make has been thought over twice, deliberated, and committed with confidence. And an 8-point vanilla attack, nothing really to worry about besides the damage, but that damage represents half of Florin's remaining life total. Maciej already at 8. So he's saying, hey, you want to meet me at 8 and we'll talk? But it's not what's happening here. Maciej, again, this might be, I'm sure of those 7 Starvo mirrors that he's been in this position. He's probably played from behind, and he's probably played games that have been close to that death mark. But
absolutely.
So in these cases, Matt, you've been in these situations definitely before. What do you have to have in your hand as Florin to just accept the charges and take this damage?
Not much, to be honest. As long as you have some sort of fuse, it's probably worth it, I would say. Like, you really need to pressure. You really need to pressure this game, because again, it just keeps coming down to pummel. We keep talking about pummel. There's still another pummel in his deck, and both players know it. Okay, so yeah, it really just comes down to kind of pressuring him to make that card dead, to make that card a block too.
Worth noting as well, pummel's not just for attack actions. He could jam that on the hammer.
He can jam that on a hammer. It becomes threatening. If you're low enough life total, that's a very real threat that you have to worry about.
So is there any significance to Florin creating that seismic surge? Is that perhaps telling Maciej that perhaps there's a crippling crush around the corner? Let's say, 7 an awkward thing, creating a seismic surge means it's only a 2 blue pitch with the discount, or is that just another way to just kind of sink some of your resources?
Yeah, well, I mean, he had spare resources that turn because he had to pay for a Frostbite token, so just why not make the seismic? But the seismic does represent that crippling can come off 2 blues, so obviously that's pretty threatening.
So here's precisely what you had mentioned, Matt. Well called there. The Stalagmite has been used, and just making sure, does it go in the, we can just toss that into the graveyard. That's where it's meant to be. Another Frostbite token, and you said Maciej did use the tunic to get rid of the Frostbite, perhaps thinking I want to swing back. So, Florin picking up on that says, if you do not like this Frostbite, I'm going to give you another one because that might save me a lot of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Stalagmite, a whole extra card here. So yeah, Florin's on the front foot. Life totals are relatively even. Equipment blocks, equipment points are relatively even, except for there's a Stalagmite there, which probably represents a whole card worth of value. So we're in a very close game, a very close race here.
There was a Starvo fuse, if I'm not mistaken. Just kind
Yep.
of maybe happened real quick there. That's a yellow evergreen. Sorry, that's not a Guardian attack, so that's not going to get a discount from the Seismic Surge.
No.
Doesn't matter. It was, like you mentioned, just all a formality, another way to sort of use your resources efficiently in case something happens. You never know. But 8 Dominate go again. When Maciej is at 8, there's no margin for error here. Decisions have to be made. Cards have to be committed.
Yeah, he's going to have to give up something. Whether it's equipment or cards from hand, he knows there's another attack coming in. He is going to have to give up multiple things this turn to survive this attack. So what he's got to work out now is his best kind of pivot position from that.
Pitching a blink, it's going to be an activation of Crown of Seeds. We haven't seen many activations of Crown of Seeds in this game at all, frankly. I think there's only been a handful of them, but that is going to be soaking up 1 damage and also fixing the hand